Episode 46, A Home Cinema. Brad initially agreed to her request. However, when he remembered her injury, he changed his answer. "You're hurt," he said. "It's okay. I wasn't planning on going anywhere anyway. Would you mind staying in and just binging some movies with me?" Haley's eyes grew even more adorable as she pressed her palms together, begging like a child for her father to buy her the pony that she had been dreaming of her entire life. Her pleas were a lethal weapon that could knock anyone senseless and make them agree to whatever she asked for. "Okay, let's do that," Brad replied after a long look at her pleading face. Her face lit up with joy at his response. It had been a long time since she had just sat down and binged movies, simply because she hadn't wanted to watch them alone. Lately, Owen, who used to be her movie pal, had been turning her down with every imaginable excuse whenever she had suggested to him to watch a movie, leaving her bewildered. But since he was recovering from his illness, she did not force him too much. Since her feet were injured, Haley called the maids and asked them to set everything up. She had a plan. A few minutes later, Brad carried her toward the living room. A television with a huge screen had been set up in front of a large red bed. The gray curtains blocked the light from outside. The only light was a romantic glow of the silver chandelier. Brad gently set Haley down on the bed and she leaned against the headboard. He sat down beside her. "The first movie I ever saw in a movie theater was a cartoon one," she began. "What about you?" "I never go to movie theaters," he replied. Okay. Then consider this your first time. What do you want to watch? Action, comedy, love story, thriller?" she asked. "Up to you," was all he said. She decided that the best course of action was to go back to basics. She didn't want to rush things, figuring it would be better to just relax and not think too much. She thought about the steps listed in her notebook and chose what she thought was the easiest one. Step 5 was for her to just be herself. Amy hadn't said very much about the 5th step. She had simply said, "Just let him see who you really are. If he likes you, you're all set." Haley had understood her at the time and had actually been following that rule the entire time. This time, the only difference was that she planned on forgetting about her notes after she chose the movie. She wanted to just spend the day with Brad and see what would happen. She chose a comedy for the first movie. For the first few minutes of the movie, her attention was on the screen, and she laughed a lot. She noticed that Brad wasn't laughing, though, so her own laughter began to fade. Brad showed no reaction at all to the movie and was instead watching her. "What's he doing? Why isn't he laughing?" she wondered. Then she remembered her plan. She turned away from him and returned her attention to the movie. At one point, she laughed so hard that she started rolling around on the bed, holding her stomach. Since Brad was still unresponsive, she imagined that she was watching the movie with Owen, who she knew would be laughing just as hard as she was. Later in the movie, she found herself slapping Brad's shoulder while she laughed. She was completely immersed in the story, in sharp contrast to her silent, motionless husband. He wasn't even looking at the screen. He was still focused only on the woman beside him. The next movie they watched was a romantic comedy. Brad watched Haley with increasing curiosity as she giggled and hugged her pillow. She pulled his arm closer to her during one scene, only to brush it aside a few minutes later when something in the movie upset her. After a particularly happy scene, she clapped loudly, like the audience in a movie theater might do. He marveled at her strange but adorable behavior. Episode 47, An Emotional Roller Coaster. Then the third movie started. Haley had chosen an action movie. At first, she watched it quietly. As the story grew more intense, though, so did her reactions. She covered her face with a pillow during the most violent scenes. When the main character was about to be shot and killed, she hid behind Brad. "Run! Run faster!" she cried. Her unpredictable and rapidly changing emotions fascinated Brad. At the end of the movie, when the villain died a gruesome death, her eyes welled up. Brad had been watching her for several hours and was already overflowing with wonder and curiosity. Her tears confused him, though. He hadn't expected her to cry at the villain's death. He reached for a box of tissues and handed it to her, watching intently as she dabbed at her eyes. Seeing her display so many different emotions left him speechless. He couldn't believe that a lifeless screen could make her laugh and cry so hard. She had been on an emotional roller coaster while they watched the 3 different genres of movies. She cried for a few more minutes. Then Brad, who had remained motionless and had shown no emotional reaction for several hours, spoke. "He killed lots of people. Why do you care that he died?" he asked, resting his chin on his hand. The movie he was asking about, the third one that they had watched, was about a man who had become a ruthless serial killer. He had killed people mercilessly for sport, while the protagonist had hunted him down. At the end of the story, after the killer's own gruesome death, there had been a flashback that had shown his own family's brutal death, which had prompted him to plot his revenge against everyone involved. Haley was stunned. She realized that she had completely ignored Brad for almost the entire time. More importantly, he hadn't shown any interest in the movies. Why is he asking me that? She wondered. She thought for a moment before replying. I don't know. But it's not like sympathizing with his backstory means I'm on his side. He was totally heartless, and what he did was wrong, no matter what his reasons were. But I think his reason for killing everyone was the saddest part of the movie. Brad remained silent for a moment. Then he gently reached out to smooth her hair. She smiled at him and seemed to be returning to her normal, energetic self. Seeing the return of her bright smile, Brad asked, "Want to watch one more?" "No, I'm tired." She shook her head as she yawned and stretched her arms. "So, how was your first time at a movie theater?" "Not bad," he replied. Haley sighed. She knew she was the only one who had enjoyed the experience that she had dared to call a date. "You were bored, weren't you?" she asked. Brad, seeing her disappointment, patted her head gently. "I didn't have time to get bored because you were so noisy," he said, rendering her speechless. "And wild. You couldn't sit still," he continued, causing her mouth to drop open in disbelief. Haley couldn't hold her laughter back. She reached out and tousled his hair playfully, still laughing in amusement. "Why are you being so cute today?" she continued. Her eyes sparkled as though she had just seen Brad transform himself into an adorable little monster. Haley's question was unscripted. It was part of her overall plan of just being herself. Unfortunately, it turned out to be quite destructive. "Cute," Brad thought. When he heard Haley use that word to describe him, his brow furrowed. He remained silent. Who is she calling cute? Episode 48. Let me help you with that. Later that night, as they were finishing their dinner, Brad reminded her that he would be going away. He would leave Leo with her as her bodyguard. From that point on, Leo would go with her wherever she went. "Even when I spend the night at Owen's place?" she asked. "Just leave him outside," he replied. She sighed. She had noticed that whenever Brad was talking about someone other than her, he reverted to his cold, heartless tone. "He's not serious, is he? How could I leave that cute thing out in the cold, dark hallway by himself?" she thought. An hour later, Brad was ready to leave. Since Haley was injured and couldn't perform her kiss and run trick, she just gazed at him from her seat in the living room. "I'm heading out," he said, and then he turned his back on her and walked away. She watched him for a few seconds and then called out. Wait," she said hesitantly. He turned around. Haley nodded shyly toward Mr. Green and Mr. Clark, indicating to Brad that she wanted him to come closer so that they could speak privately. "I have something to tell you." Seeing her shy expression, Brad walked back and stopped in front of her. She motioned him closer so that she could whisper something to him. He bent down and turned his ear toward her. Several seconds passed, and she hadn't said a single word. Curious, he turned to look at her. As soon as he was facing her, he felt a warm kiss land on the tip of his nose. "Oops, I was aiming for his cheek. He turned too quickly." Haley laughed to herself. They were both speechless. Haley turned as red as a tomato, while Brad, who remained motionless, stared at her. Haley had gone into mission mode. She was performing Step 12, which said to occasionally surprise him with simple things. She had wanted to do something for him before he left, but in her current state, there wasn't much she could do other than plant a quick kiss. At least she managed to surprise him. Actually, I surprised both of us, she thought. Noticing how close Brad still was to her, she inched back, biting her lip. "Have a safe trip," she said. He finally stepped away. He muttered as he stood up and patted her hair. Then he walked away and disappeared from view. The next day, Haley found herself being followed around by an elderly man, overflowing with majestic elegance, who had been introduced as Mr. Wilson, the substitute butler. She was slightly suspicious of him. She felt like there was no way he was just a butler. Episode 49, Darkness and Light. The new butler, Mr. Wilson, was in fact none other than the elderly man who had ordered Haley's kidnapping several days previous. He was Brad's grandfather, Anderson Lopez. He was the father of Brad's late mother, Riley, and he was also the last king of the kingdom of Talavantia. 14 years earlier, without ever disclosing his reasons, King Anderson had managed to convince his loyalists to abolish the monarchy and turn Talavantia into a republic. It was rumored that the real reason behind his abrupt decision was because of the disappearance of his grandson and only heir, who had never appeared in public. Curiously, there had never been an official announcement about the rumored prince either, creating a mountain of never-ending gossip and theories about his existence that had persisted for 14 years. There were so many questions about the abolition of the monarchy and the prince's existence, and the facts had been buried so deeply that the truth might never be uncovered. More than a decade after his decision, the former king lived among the secret ultra-rich, who preferred to stay out of the public eye. He had become the owner of a large corporation and was among the richest and most powerful men in East Asia, but his name had never appeared on lists of powerful billionaires. Unbeknownst to many, the former king had remained at the highest echelon of power, influencing both businesses and politics in Talavantia and abroad. A man dressed in black approached the king-turned-butler who was sitting in the garden watching Haley from a distance as she read a book. "Your Majesty, what will you do if His Royal Highness suddenly shows up?" the man whispered while he hid behind the bushes. "What do you mean, Peterson?" the king asked. Won't His Highness be angry if he sees you here?" Peterson whispered back. King Anderson turned to Peterson. "Why would he get angry at his own grandfather?" "His wife was injured that day," Peterson reminded him. "Idiot! That's why I'm here. I'm paying for my men's idiocy," the old king sighed, and then he glanced up at the clear blue sky looking relieved. "But I'm glad I came after all." The truth was that King Anderson had disguised himself and gone to the Grey Mansion to observe Haley. He was planning to test her. However, from the moment he first saw her, he had not seen anything about the clever young lady that displeased him. She had no hidden intentions, and there was nothing fake about her. She always showed her true self. The longer he spent observing and talking to her, the more he approved of her. "She shines like a light, that young woman. I have never met anyone brighter. I wonder how Brad feels when he's with her," the king continued, making the man behind him frown with curiosity. "Sire, what do you mean?" Peterson asked. King Anderson replied, "That young lady is like a ball of fire. She could melt Brad if he let his guard down. Maybe even burn him a little." Then he sighed. Surprised by the king's answer, Peterson asked another question. "If that's the case, why aren't you happy?" The king remained silent for a moment before replying. "With Brad, things will never be easy. Those two are like night and day. He is the darkness, and she is the light. Can you imagine experiencing night and day at the same time?" He looked up at the sky, and his hidden companion saw sorrow in his eyes. "Sire, that means that the only way for them to be together is for His Highness to stop being so dark, or the young lady to stop being so bright," Peterson said. "That's right. If only it were as easy as you make it sound." Episode 50. What would you like to know? It had been more than 2 weeks since Brad had departed, and Haley hadn't heard from him. It was as if he had just disappeared without a trace. Every time he left, Haley felt that something strange was going on. She couldn't put her finger on it, though. He was shrouded in mystery, and whenever he left, he disappeared so completely that she wondered if he was just a dream. "Do you miss him?" Mr. Wilson asked as they strolled through the garden and watered the plants. Haley smiled. "I do." It was the longest she had gone without seeing him. She hadn't expected to miss him so much, but she had realized that she needed to feel his presence. "His occasional absences are inevitable. Is that all right with you?" the butler asked. She was silent for a moment. Then she turned to face the elderly butler. I think I'm okay with it. I know he has a lot to do, but this is the longest he's been away. I miss him a little more every day." Her cute, awkward smile and sincere words warmed Mr. Wilson's heart. He had been growing distant from the world, but the young lady walking beside him was pulling him back. She was like the sun awakening him from a deep sleep. "I'm sure he misses you even more, ma'am," he reassured her. "You think so?" she asked. "Why not? You think your grandpa is lying?" Mr. Wilson asked with a smile. Sorry, Grandpa, but I'm not really convinced." Haley chuckled mischievously for a moment and then continued more seriously. "When it comes to Brad, how can I say this? He's a bit hard to read. He's like a book I can't even open because the cover has been glued shut." "Is that frustrating?" the butler asked. She paused, putting a hand on her hip. "Frustrating? No, I guess not. But I admit my curiosity has been increasing recently, and I might burst soon." "I'm trying to hold on and be patient." They walked silently for a moment, and then she spoke again. "Grandpa, I think it's time for us to have a little chat. You promised to tell me about Brad if I cooked for you for a week, remember?" He smiled. She looked like a spoiled teenager who was about to make an outrageous demand of her old grandpa. So you won't go easy on this old man, he said. Nope, she replied. Mr. Wilson sighed. Okay, I'll tell you. They sat down in the gazebo. Haley looked incredibly excited. So, what did you want to know about him? Do you want to know why he wears a mask? Mr. Wilson asked. Haley's eyes widened and sparkled with delight. She imagined being offered a gold box containing the most mysterious secret in the world. Then the sparkle vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Instead of seeing a gold box, she now saw Pandora's box, and she knew that opening it could unleash damage that she wouldn't be able to undo. Noticing her expression, Mr. Wilson laughed. Are you that scared of him? She quickly shook her head. It's not fear. I just don't want to do anything that would anger him. And I would never purposely break my promise, she said with determination, even as disappointment flashed across her face. Are you saying you're okay with never knowing anything about him? She shook her head even more quickly. No, I wouldn't be okay with it forever. But I'm not in a rush. I hope he'll tell me everything himself someday. What if that day never comes? Mr. Wilson asked. Her eyes narrowed, and then she flashed an evil grin. I'll force it out of him. Of course you will. But how? This old grandpa wants to witness it with his own 2 eyes. It's my secret, but I'll get the truth out of him, she replied. Her eyes suddenly burned with determination. Her fighting spirit made Mr. Wilson smile. He was sure that no one else in the world was more suitable for Brad than the young lady seated next to him. He was rooting for her. That's the spirit, ma'am. He beamed with satisfaction. And because of your determination, you get a reward. I can answer as many questions as you want, as long as you don't ask who he really is. How about it? Episode 51, A Sweet Boy. Haley and Mr. Wilson sat facing each other in the gazebo, both looking as if the most eagerly awaited interview of the century were about to begin. So, what would you like to know? The majestic old butler asked with a soft smile, breaking the silence. Haley, who had been lost in thought, sat up straight and stared at him intently. She looked like a treasure hunter about to set off on an adventure. She was entering a danger zone, but it was a familiar danger. What was Brad like when he was young? She asked. Her voice was soft, filled with curiosity and sincerity. Her eyes shone intensely, and she gave off an energy so strong that Mr. Wilson could feel it. The effect was so powerful that even the most secretive person would tell her anything that she wanted to know. He smiled to himself, as if he had just discovered his own hidden treasure, one that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. The most interesting thing was that she didn't seem to have any awareness at all about how irresistible she was. She was just being her curious and sincere self without realizing that she was doing anything more than asking questions. He smiled at her as he spoke. How young? How about up to age 10, she suggested. Looking pleased with her question, he nodded happily, as if he were excited to tell a favorite bedtime story to his granddaughter. At that age, he was, Would you believe me if I told you he was really adorable, especially up until age 5? Really? Did he laugh and talk a lot? She was an eager listener. If Mr. Wilson was the excited grandfather telling stories, she easily fulfilled the role of granddaughter, begging to hear more of her favorite character's adventures. Not a lot, but yes, he did talk a bit at that age. He was really bright, too. Really clever and sweet, he continued. Huh? Sweet? Her smile slowly faded. She was speechless. She tried to imagine how a cold statue whose face was hidden behind a black mask could be sweet. She even tried visualizing the statue feeding her chocolates, smiling sweetly and saying, "Open wide," as it placed the chocolate on her tongue. The image boggled her mind, and she choked on her own laughter. She coughed. Mr. Wilson patted her back, laughing mischievously at her as if he knew what she had been imagining. It hadn't occurred to Haley that her conversation with Mr. Wilson would make her feel so strange. Who is that boy he's describing? That's not Brad at all. Or maybe the Brad in my head isn't the real one, she thought. A new image of him popped into her mind. This one was a ceramic cat who sat motionless and expressionless while she petted him. You can't imagine him being sweet, can you? I understand. Would you believe that he even used to kiss me on the cheeks and hug my legs when he cried? Mr. Wilson asked. Her brain started to spin as the butler spoke. She wondered if his stories were meant to tease her. She tried to imagine Brad kissing her cheek, calling her his sweetheart, and asking her to cuddle as he reached out for a hug. The images shocked her. She shook her head violently and repeated, "No, no, no. Stop it, Grandpa. It's impossible for Brad to act like that." He laughed at her reaction. "What are you imagining? Remember that I'm talking about a 5-year-old child," he said mischievously. Her face reddened. "Yeah, where is my mind going?" she laughed to herself. It was impossible for her to even imagine the current version of Brad suddenly being sweet and cuddly. However, when she imagined the adult Brad shrinking into a 5-year-old boy, the cuteness was much easier to see. She realized that she would have loved to shower little Brad with hugs and kisses, even if he had been just as cold and emotionless as adult Brad. Episode 52. Perfect timing. Okay, I have another question. Haley switched gears and stared intently at Mr. Wilson again. She had found the first hidden treasure and was now ready for a more difficult challenge. That was fast, Mr. Wilson thought. She seemed to have gotten over the shock of learning Brad had once been a sweet child. Was there anything he liked when he was young? She asked. The innocence and curiosity in her eyes made him smile again. She asked about the simplest but most beautiful aspects of his grandson. He couldn't help wanting to tell her everything. Even when he was that young, he wasn't picky. But he didn't have anything I would call his favorite thing. He paused when he saw her smile fade. He laughed briefly and then continued. However, there was one thing I believe he really did like. Haley brightened. She moved closer to him and sat up straight again. What was it? Please tell me, Grandpa. Oh, she is good, Mr. Wilson thought. He was amused and delighted with the things he was slowly discovering about the adorable, bright-eyed young lady sitting in front of him. Seeing her plead with him so sweetly made him feel like the happiest old man in the world. It had been more than a decade since someone had pleaded with him like that, and her questions brought him joy. It was the piano, he finally said. Haley blinked. Huh? Really? She uttered. He smiled wistfully. Back then, the sound of a piano would always calm him down no matter how upset he was. It was his lullaby. He had a hard time sleeping without it. Haley could hear the sadness in his voice as he recalled moments from a forgotten past. She sensed his pain and sorrow and felt an urge to cry. Are you surprised? He asked. She smiled and nodded, feeling a little tug at her heartstrings. I didn't know he liked piano music. Did he play? She asked. No, he never learned. It's not like he couldn't, he just didn't want to. He said he only liked listening to it, he replied. Who played it for him? She asked. His mother, the butler responded. Haley sighed and looked away, not noticing the deep sorrow that flashed across the elderly man's face. Why are you sighing? He asked. I'm relieved because I thought he didn't have a family, but now I'm glad to know he does. Really glad, she exclaimed. Mr. Wilson, who could hear genuine relief in her voice, asked, Why? Do I need a reason? It's sad being alone, so I'm really happy to know that he's not. She smiled brightly. The butler, however, did not smile. Instead, a hint of coldness, reminiscent of Brad, flickered in his eyes. Haley's smile faded again. Well, there are people he calls family, but not the kind of family you're talking about, he said. She was speechless. Mr. Wilson's sudden coldness stunned her. Just then a voice called out, piercing through the cold. Ma'am, dinner's ready. Leo abruptly appeared in the gazebo, and Haley turned to look at him. Oh, okay, she muttered before turning back to Mr. Wilson. His warmth had returned, and he was his usual cheerful self again. What just happened? Why did his mood change like that? She wondered. No wonder I'm so cold. I'm starving. My poor stomach is calling out to me, Mr. Wilson laughed. His words were followed by a weak grumbling from his stomach that made all three of them laugh. Haley felt bad for the elderly man. Sorry, Grandpa, she apologized, taking his hand to help him stand. Why are you apologizing? There's no need for that, Miss Haley, he said. I'm not apologizing to you, Grandpa. I'm apologizing to your poor stomach, she joked. They all laughed again and then headed back toward the mansion. The king-turned-butler looked away and sighed in relief. I was too close. Her questions are getting dangerous, he thought. He was grateful for Leo's well-timed interruption. Episode 53. A Normal Old Man. When Saturday morning rolled around, Haley and Leo left the gray mansion. She told the house staff that she was going to spend the night at her little brother's place. As soon as Haley left, the king-turned-butler departed as well, accompanied by Peterson. On their way back to New York Harbor, Mr. Wilson assumed the appearance of Mr. Lopez. How did it go, Peterson? Were you able to get past Brad's barriers and find out anything about her? Mr. Lopez was firm and serious, the complete opposite of the warm and cheerful elderly butler. Let's be realistic, Your Majesty. You know how tough your grandson is. He doesn't trust us anymore. All information about her has been secured or erased. I can't find anything. Peterson, who was the king's most trusted advisor, even though he was only a few years older than Brad, looked troubled. That little. Why is he hiding everything? Mr. Lopez asked. That's the big question, sire, but I'm not sure who's really responsible for it. It could be His Highness himself who did it, or it could be that guy Tyler. Peterson replied. He scowled when he mentioned Tyler's name. Mr. Lopez sighed. He knew they would never find anything if Brad had hidden the information. He looked at Peterson and said, Tyler's just as difficult as Brad. I can't get anything out of him. He sighed again. Peterson, sensing an opportunity, suggested, maybe it's time to stop looking. Mr. Lopez's response made Peterson's jaw drop. No, keep going. If computers and high-tech intelligence are useless, then go back to the pre-internet days. Old-fashioned gossip might help. Peterson sighed. Stubborn old man, he thought. Still, he had to go along with the king's wishes. He had to admit that he was still curious about Haley. He had noticed that Mr. Lopez had changed since his arrival at Gray Mansion, and he was sure that it was because of her. He had been guarding the former king for almost a decade. He had lived in the palace as a child, so he had seen what Mr. Lopez was like when he was still the king. More than a decade after stepping down, the only royalty left in him was his majestic aura. The protocols that he had followed were long gone. Peterson now saw a normal, elderly man who wanted a great-grandchild. It was a long, tiring day for Haley. Miss Lee called her, and they went first to the National Library and then to a mall, where they spent the rest of the day shopping. Leo watched over both of them. After Miss Lee left, Haley and Leo went straight to Cold Spring. Haley pulled her little brother into a hug, which surprised Leo. He wasn't used to seeing such affection. Who's he? Owen asked curiously, glancing at Leo. Owen, this is Leo, Brad's younger brother. Leo, this is Owen, my younger brother. Even though Haley usually introduced Leo as Brad's brother, Leo was still shocked to hear it. He would never think of his boss as his brother. The three of them had a good time together that evening. Owen was thrilled to make a new friend, and he and Leo stayed up playing video games until they passed out. Episode 54, Locked Out. Haley still hadn't heard from Brad. Even though she was busy studying for her entrance exam, she missed him. When are you coming back? She whispered to herself. A week went by. The house grew cold and silent. Mr. Wilson had departed a few days previously, and without his smile to brighten the atmosphere, gloom lingered in every nook and cranny. The stillness was driving Haley crazy. For the first time since she had set foot in the Gray Mansion, she felt an indescribable sadness. She buried herself in her pile of books. The exam was getting closer, and studying provided a distraction. When she was immersed in her books, she was able to ignore the gloom. One morning, after studying for several hours, she took a break and went out into the garden, carrying her precious notebook. She waved to Mr. Green and the maids, who had also stepped outside for some fresh air. She wandered through the garden, lost in thought. Even though she was spending so much of her time studying, she hadn't forgotten her mission. She could see that her current situation wasn't ideal. She couldn't just sit quietly and wait for Brad's return. She needed to do something. I need to stick to my mission, even though he's still gone, she thought. She sat on the grass and opened her notebook, studying every step with the careful concentration of a detective trying to crack a code. She was surprised to see that she had only executed 12 steps in the month she had spent with Brad. Really? That's it? She sighed. She was disappointed with herself. She pouted and bit her lip, tugging on her hair as she stared at the pages. After a few minutes, she jumped up and shouted with joy, as if she had deciphered the code. Her eyes brightened and she felt fully recharged. Leo? Are you there? She called out. Leo, as stealthy as a ninja, suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Right here, ma'am. He stood like a soldier ready to receive an order. Can you give me Brad's cell phone number? She asked. Leo froze. Sorry, Miss Haley. I don't have it, he replied. Haley remained silent for a moment. She sat down again and looked up at Leo with eyes that reminded him of a sad kitten. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I think you just don't want me to have it. Even Mr. Green won't tell me. Why are you keeping it from me? She asked. She was devastated and looked like she was about to cry. Before Leo could respond, she stormed back toward the mansion and locked every door. She ran into her room and locked that door too. Leo and the rest of the house staff were stunned, and they glanced at each other in shocked silence. Haley had never behaved like that before. She had always been serene and composed and had never been that upset. Her uncharacteristic behavior shook them to the core. Episode 55. Tears and Hugs. Leo returned to his senses. He was still upset and scared, but he knew that he couldn't just stand there. He had to do something. He considered sneaking into the house, but he didn't know what Haley was up to and didn't want to make the situation worse. Mr. Green and the maid started talking at the same time. "What should we do?" one maid asked. "What if something happens to her while we're stuck out here?" another one cried. "Please don't say such a thing," Mr. Green responded. "What should we do?" the first maid repeated her question. Everyone was scurrying around in a panic. The only person who had remained motionless was Leo, who was so still that he seemed to be rooted to the earth. He was lost in thought. He knew that if he didn't fix their current problem, the consequences would be severe. In addition to locking the external doors, Haley had also locked herself in her room. She had been scribbling in her notebook with the intense concentration of a general planning a siege of an impenetrable city. Not noticing that it was already dark outside, she had kept writing. She stopped only when she felt hungry. She left her room and was shocked to find Leo, Mr. Green, and a maid standing outside and looking in at her. They looked tired, as though they had been standing there for hours. Remembering what she had done, Haley's mouth dropped. Overcome with guilt, she ran toward the door. She had locked the doors to show them how upset she was. She had assumed that they could unlock them whenever they wanted. She had also assumed that at least part of his staff, most likely Leo or Mr. Green, had Brad's number. When she saw them standing outside, it occurred to her that even if they had his number, he might have ordered them not to give it to her. The realization upset her even more. But why are they still outside? Why didn't they just unlock the door and come in? What have I done? She wondered. She unlocked and opened the door for them. Mr. Green and the maids all burst into worried cries. One of the maids, out of worry, started crying at the sight of Haley. Haley froze. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to lock you out," she cried. They all shook their heads. "No, ma'am, there's no need to apologize. It's our fault," Mr. Green said. Haley reached out to hug them all. "I'm okay now. I was just a bit upset. Please stop crying." Her soothing words calmed them, and their worries disappeared as her arms wrapped around them. Feeling comforted and relieved, they left. All except for Leo, who still looked as tense as he had when Haley had spotted him through the window. He looked like a troubled soldier who had just made the mistake of sending a false alarm to his general. "What's wrong?" she asked with concern. He looked up for a moment and then back at the ground. I'm sorry, Miss Haley," he said softly. Haley smiled and patted his shoulder, trying to calm him down. "I said I'm okay. People get upset every now and then, including me," she said. "Don't worry. I am not angry or upset with you. It's all Brad's fault for being so stern. I'm going to beat him up when he's back," she continued, pouting. Her words cheered Leo up. He laughed at the idea that she would beat him up for the trouble he had caused. Nobody had dared to talk about Brad like that. Nobody but Haley. Episode 56. Brad Returns. It was already past midnight when a black car quietly pulled up to Gray Mansion. The car door opened and a man with a terrifying, brooding aura stepped out. As soon as Leo saw him, cold sweat trickled down his back. When Haley hadn't opened the door after an hour, Leo had decided to send an emergency message to Brad, even though it was forbidden to contact him. This was the reason he had not given Haley Brad's number. Leo's message had been short. "Miss Haley is in trouble." So when Haley had opened the door 2 hours later, Leo had realized that he was now the one in trouble, and from that moment, he felt doomed. He knew that Brad was already on his way back by the time Haley emerged, and it was too late to tell him it was a false alarm. "Where is she?" Brad's terrifying voice cut through the night. The sound was enough to make Leo's knees knock together in fear. The man was back to his pre-Haley self. He was stone cold, emotionless, and terrifying. He was shrouded in pitch black aura, and it felt like anything he touched might suffocate. He was unrecognizable from the man who spent time around Haley. "She's already asleep, boss," Leo finally answered. "What happened?" Brad asked sharply. "Well, she was..." Leo felt he was trapped in a corner, and he was so nervous that he could barely speak. He knew it was never wise to anger Brad when he was like this. However, he couldn't think of what else to tell him apart from the truth, since lying wasn't an option.
Just say it,
Brad said firmly, and Leo once again shuddered in fear. Brad's cold voice always scared him, but it seemed more intense than usual this time. Leo knew he had no choice. He mentally prepared himself for the worst and then just spoke.
Well, she said,
he stuttered, then he just spat it out.
She said she wanted to beat you.
As soon as those words came out of his mouth, a quiet breeze seemed to pass by, and the whole world seemed to grind to a halt. Another man had climbed out of the car. It was Tyler, and he watched with interest with a dark expression on his face. Leo waited for Brad's reaction, terrified. Meanwhile, Brad was completely stunned, his terrifying aura suspended for a moment, while he tried to comprehend what he had heard. Deafening silence descended. The young man in front of him silently pleaded, "I'm sorry, miss. Please forgive me. I had no choice, but I know this man will never lay a finger on you."
Why?
Leo's thoughts were interrupted by a single word. He noticed that Brad's ice-cold demeanor had changed. He exhaled in quiet relief as if he had just escaped death. Sensing that this was the time to speak, Leo decided he could tell him everything. He must. He would beg for Haley's forgiveness and accept her punishment when this was all over.
Well, she said because you're so mean,
Leo said. Brad was silent again for a while and then asked,
Mean? Me? Why?
She asked me for your cell phone number, and when I wouldn't give it to her, she stormed in the house and locked herself inside for 5 hours and wouldn't let anyone enter, he explained. Upon hearing what Leo told him, Brad was speechless. His dark aura was slowly subsiding as his confusion and curiosity got the better of him.
Miss Haley said she was so upset,
Leo continued, and that's when Brad felt the crack in his armor. He didn't know why, but it was as though a huge meteor had just fallen on him when he had heard that his wife was upset. Suddenly, a loud laugh echoed through the night.
This is indeed trouble, terrifyingly huge trouble. Listen to me, Brad. She said you're mean, and she wanted to beat you. That means you're the reason she's upset,
Tyler announced in a loud voice that cut through the darkness. He looked serious, but inside, he was laughing like a devil. His dark expression from a moment ago had vanished into thin air. Brad heard Tyler's words, but remained motionless. It was a complete surprise, and he couldn't comprehend what he was hearing. At the same time, he was shocked by his own reaction.
What will you do now?
Tyler asked in a serious tone as he continued grinning on the inside. He was amused by the troubled expression on this man's face, which now looked completely different from his monstrous appearance only moments ago. Brad didn't answer. Instead, he threw his question back at him.
What should I do? That's easy,
Tyler said as he put his arm around Brad's shoulders.
Just let her beat you, and then it'll be settled.
Tyler then laughed aloud and said,
I would love to see that. Wait, I should record it.
And with that, he laughed some more. Episode 57, Find Me a Teddy Bear.
Just let her beat you and then it'll be settled.
When he heard Tyler's advice, Brad shrugged his hand off his shoulder.
I can't wake her up now. We need to get back right away,
he said. Tyler tugged at his hair, demonstrating his disappointment.
Damn it, what bad timing,
Tyler thought.
And then you'll just have to let her beat you when we're officially back, okay?
Tyler was beginning to sound like he really wanted to see Brad beaten up by his wife.
Shut up,
Brad said coldly. Then he walked toward the entrance to the house. Some moments later, the door of their bedroom was pushed open gently and silently. The room was lit by the soft yellow light of the bedside lamp. He walked quietly over to the bed and stared down at the sleeping figure, still clutching a book in her hand. After a few moments, he gently took the book out of her hands and placed it on the bedside table. Gazing at Haley's peaceful, angelic face, Brad felt strangely comforted, as if she were a calm oasis in the middle of a vast desert. He watched her sleeping, and after a while, he began to caress her soft cheek gently without thinking. Moments later, he realized what he was doing and didn't understand what had made him touch her like that. He was just about to stop when Haley reached out her hand and he froze. Then she clasped his hand, pulled it toward her, and held it like a teddy bear or pillow. She didn't wake, but continued to sleep soundly. Brad was completely bewildered, first by his own spontaneous affectionate gesture, but also by the situation he now found himself in. Haley continued sleeping peacefully without letting go of his hand. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't want to wake her up, but he also needed to leave as soon as possible. He had no idea how to remove his hand without disturbing her. Tyler sent a message to Brad to say that they were running out of time and needed to leave immediately. However, when he received Brad's reply, he had to read it twice to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Bring me a teddy bear.
What? A teddy bear? Why?
Tyler said aloud, his voice echoing in the quiet living room. But he soon somehow realized what was going on.
Leo, find a teddy bear, quickly. Go to the maid's house. They might have one there.
As soon as he received the instruction, Leo disappeared. A few minutes later, he returned with a small teddy bear. Tyler grabbed it from him and ran upstairs. He quietly opened the door to the bedroom, and his eyes widened when he saw the awkward position that Brad had gotten himself into. He crept over to the bed, trying hard not to make a sound. Tyler knew if they woke Haley, they might not be able to leave at all. So, with the care of 2 soldiers tasked with defusing a bomb, they began to extricate Brad's hand from Haley's grasp while carefully trying to replace it with a teddy bear. Haley's brows knitted halfway through the delicate process, and she made a quiet, grumbling sound in her sleep. Brad and Tyler immediately froze and stopped breathing. They waited until her face relaxed and she started to breathe evenly again. The moment they were sure she was asleep, Tyler signaled for Brad to continue removing his hand, and after a short while, the teddy bear was in place. Brad, finally free of Haley's grip, stood up. They were preparing to leave when they heard another noise, and Haley again moved unexpectedly. Tyler grabbed Brad and pulled him down onto the floor, signaling him to hide. The 2 of them lay flat at the end of the bed as though they were soldiers hiding from the enemy. Tyler had his hand over his mouth and his shoulders were shaking. He was desperately trying not to laugh. Brad, on the other hand, was wondering what the hell they were doing, acting like a couple of guilty kids. After a few moments, they heard a quiet moan come from Haley, and then a second after that, the light was switched off.
Damn, she's awake,
they both thought. They waited a little longer, and soon they heard her breathing evenly again. So they reckoned she must have only been half awake when she turned off the light. When they were satisfied she was sound asleep again, the 2 men carefully crept out of the room. Once they had reached the living room, they each breathed a huge sigh of relief. Tyler burst out laughing as soon as they were outside the house. He was laughing so much that he was doubled up. Brad, on the other hand, just looked back at the house. He stood there quietly for a moment before walking toward the car. Episode 58, The Cell Phone. Haley woke up confused and suspicious the next morning. She was staring at the book on the table that she had been reading the night before. Then her eyes fell on the small white teddy bear on her bed. She was still half asleep, but when she remembered her dream, that Brad had been sitting on the bed caressing her cheek as she fell asleep in his arms, she jumped up and ran toward the door. She looked around, but saw no one. She then walked toward the kitchen and found the butler preparing her breakfast. "Mr. Green, did Brad come home last night?" she asked. The butler turned around in surprise.
"He did arrive home late last night, Miss Haley. How did you know?"
he replied with a smile. Her eyes immediately sparkled when she heard this. "Where is he?" she asked, sounding excited. When he saw how excited she was, the butler's face fell.
"I'm sorry, Miss Haley. He already left."
She fell silent. She didn't quite know why, but she felt so miserable. She sat down at the table and rested her head in her hands, feeling like some invisible force had drained her of her energy. "Why did he leave without even waking me up?" she thought. It finally dawned on her that she was upset because she had been missing him. She just really wanted to see him and was bitterly disappointed.
"Please don't feel sad, Miss Haley. Your husband dropped by last night to give you this."
Haley immediately raised her head when she heard what the butler said. Her mouth dropped open as he handed her a cell phone.
"He said that you can use this phone if you want to contact him. His number is already saved in there."
Haley looked at the cell phone in disbelief. She took it from the butler and opened it in silence. She saw the single phone number saved in it, smiled, then hugged the old man briefly before skipping away. Mr. Green watched her go, smiling happily for her. Sitting inside the quiet gazebo, Haley was deep in thought. She understood that Brad must have some complicated reasons for all this, and she felt bad for being upset with him. However, she found some comfort in telling herself that feeling upset was a normal reaction. Anyway, it seemed as if revealing to him how upset she had been had resulted in a positive outcome. She was happy to know that Brad was actually looking out for her, even though he was not by her side. While she thought about this, she was motivated to work even harder. She breathed deeply and her eyes started to burn with passion and determination. But from time to time, Haley's attention was drawn to the phone on the table. Her eyes narrowed and she appeared to be considering a certain strategy before commencing battle. But the difficulty was deciding exactly what that strategy would be. She was considering the fact that she couldn't possibly call him whenever she wanted, since she didn't know where he was and what he was doing. What if I call him when he's busy? Or what if he's on the other side of the globe and it's already way past midnight? She thought. Apart from that, Haley was also having a hard time deciding which of her steps to execute next. But after minutes of thinking and planning, an excited and optimistic smile lit up her face. It seemed she had finally decided on the perfect strategy. Episode 59, The Phone Call. Brad was, in fact, somewhere in Australia. He was sitting in a dimly lit, spacious room surrounded by computers all whirring away, while he quietly stared at a large screen when his cell phone suddenly vibrated. Tyler was sitting right in front of the door with the look of a lazy security guard, but when he heard the cell phone, he was immediately on high alert. Nobody would ever call Brad's personal phone at this moment, not even his own grandfather. Therefore, he could only deduce that it was none other than the wife. Tyler moved behind Brad as quick as a flash as he prepared to eavesdrop on the conversation. Brad, on the other hand, watched his phone as it rang for a while before he finally answered.
Hello?
Haley said. As soon as he heard her sweet voice, Brad was struck dumb. He seemed to forget for a moment that he was supposed to respond.
Hello? Brad?
By the time she said hello a second time, he seemed to wake up, but when he heard her say his name for some inexplicable reason, no words would come out of his mouth.
Hello? Can you hear me?
She persisted. Hearing the word hello for the third time seemed to bring him to his senses once again. But before he could open his mouth to answer, Haley's gentle voice abruptly sounded again.
Is this my husband, Brad?
Hearing her voice softly calling him her husband stunned him. He was lost for words. This was partly because he had never heard her refer to him like that before.
Brad,
she said again. She called his name for a third time, and he finally opened his mouth to speak. But before he had a chance, her voice rang out again.
Thank you for letting me contact you.
Upon hearing this, Brad remained silent. He imagined he was a computer being attacked by viruses, one after another, not giving him the chance to defend himself. Although, in truth, he was reacting slowly as if he were a supercomputer, lagging due to some bug in the system. There was a short silence, and he somehow managed to come to his senses once more, but for the fourth time, before he could utter a word, Haley spoke again, and this time, the attack was lethal.
I miss you,
she said, and the call promptly ended. Brad was in a complete daze. The last attack had been strong enough to shut the computer down entirely. Tyler, who had been eavesdropping the whole time, although he had obviously heard nothing, waved his hand in front of Brad's face to get his attention. But the man remained motionless.
My God, Brad, what did she say? What the hell happened? Wake up. The call already ended without you even saying a word. Are you serious?
Tyler's loud voice echoed around the room. He looked as though he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was so curious about what had been said that he could hardly contain himself. Brad seemed to fall back down to earth, though he just stared blankly at him.
She called my name 3 times, he said.
Tyler frowned for a moment, but soon realized that this was actually quite remarkable. Haley had never called him by his name, apart from that one time when she was kidnapped.
And,
Tyler continued, eager to hear more.
She called me her husband, he said.
Huh?
So what? Was that a big deal?
Tyler asked, confused.
It's the first time she's called me that,
he explained.
Oh, okay, and?
Tyler asked.
She thanked me, he continued.
And? Tyler tried to encourage him.
She said.
He hesitated, but Tyler was like a little kid waiting for Christmas as he waited for him to continue.
Yes, and?
He said impatiently.
She said she missed me,
Brad said simply. A short silence followed his statement before Tyler could talk again.
That's all?
That's all.
I felt like I was under attack,
said Brad. Tyler laughed.
Seriously?
With that, he rolled on the floor and laughed hysterically, slapping the floor as if he had never heard anything so funny before in his life. Brad just quietly raised his head and stared at the dim light above him. At that moment, he felt something warm stirring inside his chest, and there was a bright flicker in his eyes. Episode 60, The Perfect Strategy. Meanwhile, back at Gray Mansion, Haley's cheeks were burning by the time she had ended the call. She didn't know what to feel at that moment, especially when Brad had not spoken a single word. She couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Was there something wrong? Was he too busy to talk? She thought. The truth was that since she couldn't decide which steps she should execute next, she had decided to complete them all at once. Besides, she had thought an all-out attack would surely have a greater impact. In addition, part of the reason was that she felt it had been so long since she last undertook a mission. Although she had been worried about failing, she had stuck to her guns and gone ahead anyway. Step number 7 was to call him by his name. She understood the importance of this step, and as Amy said, this step was an effective psychological trick in the art of seduction. But for some unknown reason, Haley realized she was having a hard time using Brad's name whenever she talked to him in person. She was relieved to discover that it was far easier to use his name over the phone, and she was happy that she had finally found a way to practice using his name. Step number 13 was to appreciate his efforts. Amy had advised her to never underestimate the power of saying thank you for every little thing, however small. Haley had already thanked the people around her, as it was in her nature, but strangely, she found it hard to express her gratitude toward Brad. It made this step challenging for her. But when she had eventually said thank you to Brad, she found that she was glad of the opportunity to do so. She had wanted to thank him for a while, not just for the cell phone, so that she could call him, but also for the many other things he had done for her since the beginning. And this was another step that she had found easier to execute over phone. Step number 17 was to let him know you're thinking about him. Amy didn't expand on this very much, except to say that it was pretty obvious. So during their phone call, Haley made sure that he would get her message loud and clear. He would know that she had been thinking about him and that she was missing him, although she didn't realize at the time that she somehow overdid it a little. Step number 6 was to keep interactions short and sweet. Amy, the love guru, recommended that you apply the law of supply and demand to this step for the best results. You have to keep the supply scarce so that the demand increases, was Amy's advice. Haley executed this step as if she were a drizzle of rain appearing out of nowhere that watered the arid, dry land that was Brad. She had accompanied all steps perfectly, even though they had been carried out so swiftly. And even though she was left wondering at Brad's lack of response and whether he was listening or not, she somehow felt a weight had been lifted, and her world suddenly seemed brighter. She couldn't explain why, but somehow she felt that something good had happened. Even though she received no response, she still felt as though her all-out attack had worked, and progress had been made, giving her both encouragement and incentive to keep moving forward. Episode 61, Texts and Calls. Haley locked herself in her study to prepare for her upcoming exam. She spent most of the day revising, and in the evening, she decided to think about the next move in her mission. She took out her precious notebook and scrutinized it for a while before settling on the step she decided was the most fitting. Step number 15 was to send him texts throughout the day. Amy had warned Haley that this step could not be treated as simple, and it needed special effort. This step required her to follow certain rules to make it effective. The first rule was to message him casually. In other words, send a message that somehow appeared laid back, but sweet at the same time. She also advised that it was better not to send messages that were too bold at the beginning. Being mindful of these words, Haley sent Brad a simple message saying, "Good evening." She added a winking cat emoji. But as soon as she sent it, she began to feel anxious. She stared at her phone, feeling like a teenage girl, waiting for her crush to reply. Suddenly, the phone rang. "What? He's calling?" she thought. She was surprised. She hadn't expected the Iceman to suddenly call in response to a simple text. She quickly recovered from her shock, cleared her throat, and answered the call. "Hello? Brad?" she said. "Yes, it's me," he replied. Brad's quick response somehow baffled Haley. But at the same time, when she heard his voice, she was reminded of how gorgeous it sounded. And suddenly, that was all she could think about. And then it was she who was lost for words. She struggled to think of something to say to him, but she couldn't. She was still thinking about how deep and smooth his voice sounded over the phone. Then she said, "Oh, about yesterday. Were you busy when I called?" That was all she could think to ask. "I was not," Brad replied promptly, which made her frown slightly. This phone call was a world apart from the one yesterday. "Then why did you not say anything yesterday?" she thought. "Is that so?" she asked. Brad uttered in response. "Oh, okay. Anyway, my exam is on Saturday," she said brightly. She was glad she had finally thought of something to say and began to talk casually. When she heard him say, "Do your best," she was happy to hear words of encouragement from him. A bright smile spread across her beautiful face. "Thank you," she said. "And also, I wanted to ask if it's okay for me to call you at the same time tomorrow." "You can call anytime," he replied. "What? Anytime? Are you sure?" she asked. "Sure," he said. "Okay." Haley was surprised by this response. She had not called him again since yesterday because she was afraid she might disturb him. To hear him say that she could call anytime made her smile again. Then something started to bother her. She got a strange feeling that she couldn't shake, and her smile faded. A moment of silence passed before she could speak again. "When will you come home?" she asked, and her voice suddenly sounded despondent. However, what she heard next instantly made her eyes widen in disbelief. "I'm home," he said. "What?" Did I hear him wrong? She thought. Haley blinked a few times and then raised her head. That strange feeling had been the sensation that she was being watched. As soon as she saw Brad's silhouette standing in the doorway, Haley was struck dumb. What? Are you serious? What is this? Why does this feel like some sort of counterattack? She thought. Episode 62. Back home. Haley was speechless for a moment. Her eyes were fixed on the masked man standing in the doorway. She was still holding her cell phone, motionless. But as soon as she heard the dial tone, signaling that the call had ended, she finally snapped awake. She slowly put her cell phone down and she felt her ears burning as the man started to walk toward her. At that moment, Haley's emotions were getting ahead of her. Brad's presence was like a now you see me, now you don't magic trick, and it was making it difficult for her brain to process anything. As Brad approached, time seemed to slow down for Haley. Her mind went blank and she could only watch him inch closer and closer. Somehow, the peaceful yet melancholic atmosphere a moment ago became somewhat dramatic. Brad gazed at Haley as he slowly walked toward her. She was dressed in a large white t-shirt and sat there unmoving and gazing back at him. It was a scene straight out of a movie. Anyone watching would have thought that they were each longing for the other. However, this picture-perfect scenario didn't last for long. Out of nowhere, the large face of a shameless someone suddenly appeared in front of Haley, instantly destroying the emotionally charged atmosphere. Tyler was the stereotypical third wheel, happier to witness a couple's brawl than a romantic encounter. He stood and placed himself between the couple so Brad couldn't get any closer.
Hello, Miss Haley. I heard you said you wanted to beat the boss. Is that true? He asked.
Haley was stunned. What the hell is he talking about? Haley could have happily beaten Tyler instead. However, when she finally remembered her words that night, she gasped. Her eyes darted around, as if looking for someone. Leo appeared at the door, and Haley's glare immediately landed on him, causing him to feel a sudden chill. He instantly turned pale. He pressed his palms together and silently mouthed the word, sorry. His handsome face was apologetic as he retreated like a naughty puppy. When she saw the regret on Leo's face, Haley could only sigh. Then she cast her gaze toward Tyler, who was looking at her expectantly, as if waiting for a show. That was... she began to explain, but she stopped when Brad pulled Tyler away to one side as if he were something inconvenient blocking his way. After that, he stood very close to her and gazed at her intensely.
Did I upset you?
He asked. His question embarrassed her, and she felt as if her face was on fire. But she couldn't lie, so she nodded honestly. Looking at her red face, Brad sat beside her and continued.
If I upset you and you wish to beat me, go ahead.
Haley's eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. What? What did he just say? She thought, stunned. Episode 63. Strange punishment. What's going on? Haley thought suspiciously. She wanted to believe that Brad was just kidding, but he wasn't the type to joke around or say anything he didn't mean. What's he playing at? Does he really think I wanted to beat him? Seriously? She thought in disbelief. She was at a loss for words, and her head was spinning. While she struggled to organize her thoughts, Brad sat beside her quietly, like a small child waiting for his punishment. He resembled a statue with his quiet, stone-cold demeanor and his almost unreal physical appearance. Who on earth would beat a man like that, she thought. As she looked at him, she felt a desire to touch him with tenderness. But he seemed to switch from someone cold and lifeless to an adorable beast when he behaved like this. But Haley overcame her urge to reach out to him, as her brain finally began to operate at full capacity again, and she managed to revert to mission mode. The truth was that she was puzzled by Brad's reaction, and she was still trying to figure out the reason behind it. But the fact that he would have actually let her beat him was certainly a perfect opportunity to execute another step in her plan, regardless of whether he was serious or not. At that moment, the next step that crossed her mind was number 18, which was to be bold. Amy had emphasized the importance of being bold in the art of seduction. Although it was not always required, there were times when it was necessary to be brave, take a risk, and just see what happened. So Haley decided to increase the stakes and do something more challenging. Without wasting any more time, she began. She inhaled deeply and gazed intently at the man beside her. Okay then, consider this your punishment for upsetting me, she said in a stern voice like a woman intent on taking revenge. The man beside her just calmly uttered a single sound. He was his usual, cool, calm, and collected self. She quickly got up and stood straight and proud, as if preparing herself to beat him for real, while he remained seated on the couch, motionless. Close your eyes, she said as she stretched out her arms. Brad closed his eyes like an obedient child, and he remained silent and still as a statue. Seeing him like this almost made Haley want to throw her arms around him and hug him tight. At the same time, she thought she couldn't possibly hit this man, but as part of her mission, she had to punish him. She stared at him for a while before she finally made her move. She raised her fist and started counting. 1, 2, 2.5, 3. The moment the last number came out of her mouth, Haley's hand immediately landed lightly on his shoulder, and a kiss landed softly on his lips. Episode 64. It was only a kiss. When Haley's lips gently landed on his, the world stood still, as if time no longer existed. Haley instantly felt a spark travel through her entire body. This unexpected sensation caught her completely off guard. She had not expected such a violent reaction. She felt as if the universe stood still the moment their lips met, and that nothing else existed apart from that kiss. His lips were warm and soft, and the feelings knocked her entirely senseless, melting away all the thoughts in her head. Their second simple peck on the lips lasted for considerably longer than the first, and after about 5 seconds, Haley came to her senses and pulled away, her heart fluttering wildly like never before. As she backed off, their eyes locked, and it was as if they had never seen each other before that moment. A long, deafening silence followed as they looked into each other's eyes, saying nothing. Until, at last, Haley opened her mouth. "Welcome home. I'll go and prepare dinner," she said hastily, her voice wavering before she turned and walked quickly away. As he watched her disappear, Brad remained motionless. He was dazed and speechless. His usual frightening, dark aura and unimaginable coldness had vanished the moment she had kissed him.
Oh my God.
Tyler's loud voice cut through the atmosphere like a knife.
That was the beating she was talking about?
Ah, my pure, innocent eyes have been contaminated. When did you two become this sweet? Brad remained seated and didn't move a muscle.
Hey, are you listening to me?
Tyler shouted, and Brad finally moved. He stood up and loosened his tie. Then, without uttering a single word, he turned toward the stairs. Once upstairs, he went into his study and closed the door quietly behind him. He leaned on the door for a long time without moving before heading to the bathroom. He then turned on the shower and, without undressing, stood underneath the warm, running water. Meanwhile, Haley was still struggling to calm herself down in the kitchen. She thought she had prepared herself well enough, but still felt very shaken. She just hadn't expected it to feel like that. What had been just a small kiss had been beyond all her expectations. She had no idea that a single kiss could have such an overwhelming effect. It was just a brief, simple kiss, filled with inexperience and innocence. Yet, it had stirred feelings that she felt nothing and no one would ever extinguish. She felt as though that single kiss, that had originally just been part of her mission, was now a deeply engraved memory that would remain with her for the rest of her life. Episode 65. I Want You to Myself. After a while, Haley pulled herself together. She forced herself to focus on preparing dinner. It had almost been a month since the last time she had cooked for him, so she wanted to do her best. But as she was working away in the kitchen, Tyler interrupted her. As soon as he laid eyes on Haley, a wide smile spread across his face.
So, Miss Haley is slowly getting bolder.
Not bad, he teased. Haley, who had just managed to regain her composure, found herself blushing again. Oh, this guy, I wish he wouldn't tease me so much, she thought. Please don't tease me, Mr. Clark. I couldn't possibly beat him for real, okay? She said. Tyler just chuckled mischievously. It was obvious he enjoyed embarrassing her.
How kind of you, Miss Haley,
he said. Please stop giggling, she scolded. Tyler laughed.
Don't mind me. I'm just happy. And because I'm happy, I will tell you a secret about Brad.
Then he sidled up to her, his face full of mischief. Haley was instantly curious as soon as she heard Brad's name.
The truth is that, well, that was actually...
He stumbled over the words. Please just say it, Haley said impatiently.
Calm down, he laughed. Give me a chance and I'll tell you. Would you believe me if I told you that was actually Brad's first kiss?
She slowly moved away from him, her eyes wide in disbelief. Don't lie to me, Mr. Clark. Besides, how do you even know? It's not like you're with him 24 hours a day, she said doubtfully. She shook her head and looked at him with disapproving eyes, as if disappointed in him. But her reaction made Tyler laugh even harder.
Why can't you believe that you're the first person to kiss him?
He asked, laughing. Haley didn't understand what Tyler was talking about. Why is he saying that? It can't be true, she thought. Actually, Mr. Clark, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to tell you that I'm still upset after all. Would you stand in place of my husband? Can I beat you instead? She asked.
Hang on, I'm just a lowly bodyguard. I have nothing to do with my boss's personal life.
But Haley didn't let him finish. She grabbed his hand and locked his arms behind his back while she pushed him hard toward the kitchen door. The fragile woman was once again proving she could take care of herself.
Wait, Miss Haley, why me? You won't lay a finger on your husband when you're upset with him. So why are you being violent with me?
He pleaded. Because you're bad-mouthing my husband. I won't forgive anyone who does that, even if it's you. Do you understand? She hissed.
What? When did I badmouth your husband? I'm just telling the truth. Ouch! My God, you're strong. Maybe you're a gorilla in disguise. Ouch!
He yelped. Haley kept pulling his arm behind his back and pushing him toward the door. But then she suddenly raised her head, and over Tyler's shoulder, she saw a dark figure standing in the doorway watching her. She stopped in her tracks and, without thinking, pulled Tyler's arm again.
Ouch!
Tyler's loud cry startled her, and she let go of him instantly as her gaze remained fixed on Brad. Tyler watched as the woman who had just been holding him in a vicious arm lock reverted to her angelic self. Brad slowly walked toward her.
What happened?
He asked. Well, he said, he told me he was bad-mouthing you, saying you had never... Haley scrambled for the words, but didn't know what to say. She bit her lower lip and turned her face away, embarrassed. I can't possibly tell him what Mr. Clark just said about him, she thought. She felt a sudden chill coming from Brad, and she turned to look at him again. He was watching Tyler, glaring at him with undisguised but controlled rage, and she felt a sudden pang of guilt, even though Tyler didn't appear bothered.
I was just teasing,
Tyler began, but Haley interrupted him. Brad, it's no big deal. I was just trying to get him out of the kitchen because I want you all to myself tonight. As soon as the words came out of her mouth, a strange silence descended on the room. She was stunned by what she had just said. What the hell did I just say? She wondered.
Well, you should have told me earlier, Miss Haley. We all know that two's company and three's a crowd. I'll gladly give you lovebirds your privacy,
Tyler said, leaving the couple speechless. Episode 66, Comfort and Strength. Both Haley and Brad remained silent for what seemed like a long time. Haley finally moved first, and she rubbed her neck while smiling awkwardly at him. She didn't know why she had said what she had said, but she couldn't take the words back, so she decided to move ahead with her mission. Besides, it had been too long since her husband had been within reach like this. She knew she had to grab every opportunity to make up for the lost days when he had been absent. Shall we sit down? She asked politely with a smile. Brad nodded graciously in response. But before Haley had a chance to turn and walk toward the dining table, the cell phone in her pocket rang. They looked at each other for a moment before she answered the call. Hello? She said. Hello, am I speaking to Owen Moore's sister? Asked the voice on the other end of the phone. The moment Haley heard her younger brother's name, her heart started to race, and her smile faded. Fear and worry filled her eyes, and she gripped her phone tightly. Yes, I'm his sister. How can I help you? She stammered. Miss Moore, your brother has been rushed to the hospital, the voice said. Haley's mind went blank as soon as she heard the words, and the phone fell from her hand. Brad, who had been watching her carefully the whole time, quickly picked up the phone. He looked at Haley, who was as white as a sheet, then spoke into the phone. Hello, he said. I understand. Which hospital? He asked, and as soon as he had his answer, he hung up. He then took out his own phone and dialed a number. Tyler, get the car. Now, he said, his voice composed. Then he turned to focus on the woman standing in front of him, frightened and helpless. He had never seen her like this before. Even when faced with her ghost phobia, the fear in her eyes had not been as great as it was that moment. She usually exuded such determination and spirit, but that had been stripped from her with just a few words. Her eyes had lost their sparkle, and at that moment, the naturally bright and cheerful woman revealed her real Achilles heel. Brad's fist clenched for a while before he reached out to hold her hand gently. As soon as she felt the warmth of his palm, she lifted her head, and it was as if his touch was a source of energy that sent life back into her eyes. He said nothing, but Haley felt as if he was silently reassuring her. Don't worry, he'll be fine. She could almost hear these words as if they had come from his mouth. She nodded in response, and this startled him. He hesitated briefly, then led her toward the door and out to the car. They climbed inside the black sedan together, still holding hands. As the car sped through the city toward the hospital, nobody said a word. Haley's eyes were filled with anguish, but the warm and reassuring hand she held onto provided her comfort and strength. She felt that she would have all the support she needed to remain strong, so long as she didn't let go. Episode 67, A Changing Man. It was a dark, moonless night. Brad and Tyler waited in silence inside the black sedan, parked across the road from the hospital. Due to the increased security required around Brad, Tyler could no longer leave his side, leaving Alan as the only person available to accompany Haley inside the hospital. Brad's eyes were glued to the hospital entrance, and Tyler sensed an indescribable aura that he had never felt before. The atmosphere was quiet, cold, and almost unbearable. The moment he had let go of Haley's hand so she could go inside the hospital, Brad had begun to clench and unclench his fist. He was frustrated that he couldn't be by her side at a time like this, and felt that somehow an invisible boundary had formed between them. Brad had become accustomed to living in the dark over the years and was extremely disciplined and adept at hiding in the shadows. Up until now, he had lived this life with unfaltering dedication. But now he was beginning to waver in his resolve. For the first time in a very long time, he wanted to step out from the shadows and walk freely, just so that he could be next to her. "Tyler, I want you to get me a mask like yours," he said, without even looking at him. Tyler almost choked when he heard that. He had never thought the day would come when this man would finally agree to wear a mask that wouldn't draw too much attention. He knew how much Brad hated wearing an uncomfortable and troublesome mask that changed one's appearance. He had worn one once before and swore he would never wear it again, even if his life were in danger.
Why now? What the hell has happened? Wait, is it because he wants to be with her?
Tyler wondered. And smiled, but the smile represented both relief and uncertainty.
"Tell me, Brad, just how deep have you fallen for her?"
Tyler asked, looking at him intently. Excitement flashed in his eyes as he waited for a reply. But Brad didn't say a word in response, much to Tyler's disappointment. He didn't even glance at him. Tyler just smiled and hummed happily.
"So, should I expect a baby soon, huh, Brad?"
he continued. As soon as the word baby was mentioned, Brad's head snapped around and he glared at the humming guy sitting next to him, before turning away again.
What's with that reaction? Don't tell me you forgot the sole reason you married her.
Tyler's voice was still playful, but his words were not only intended as a joke, but also as a firm reminder. Brad began to tire of the constant babbling and uttered just 2 words. "Shut up." Tyler sighed deeply as he leaned lazily on the window while glancing at the masked man behind him. He could tell that Brad had been changing, slowly but surely, even if the man himself hadn't realized it yet. He was sure that Haley had already pierced through his armor a long time ago, and she might have lodged herself even deeper than he could imagine. He knew that she was like a warm flame, slowly melting the ice in Brad's veins. Tyler had always believed that accidentally finding her that day and selecting her as Brad's wife had been the best thing he had ever done for him. However, at that moment, even though he had considered this possibility from the very start, Haley's existence was now causing him to feel both relief and fear. Episode 68, A Changing Life. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Haley was relieved to be told by the doctor that her brother was fine. The taxi he had taken home from school had been involved in an accident, and Owen had suffered only minor injuries. Haley had cried with relief when she had heard the news. After an hour, once the doctor had checked Owen over and declared him fit to be discharged, they were finally allowed to leave. Owen had hurt his left knee, so Alan offered to carry him, and Owen kept staring at him as though he wanted to ask something. Finally, he turned to Haley and asked, "Who is he? Is he your husband?" Haley didn't know how to respond. She turned and looked at her brother and said, "No, this is Alan. He's my husband's friend." Then it was Alan's turn to be embarrassed.
"Well, I'm happy to be called a friend of Mr. Lopez, but he's really my boss," he said. "But I would be happy to be your friend." He smiled at Owen as he ruffled his hair. Owen just replied with a nod and a smile. Alan then lifted the boy onto his back, and the 3 of them began to head toward the exit. Haley could see Owen was deep in thought, and before they reached the door, he turned to her and asked, "Sis, when am I going to meet your husband?" Hearing her little brother's question, she was a little taken aback.
although she knew that Owen would have plenty of questions as soon as she had arrived at the hospital. He was a bright boy, and she knew that he had been trying to curb his curiosity since the day Haley had confessed to him that she had gotten married. She knew that he had been worrying about her this whole time, which is why she wanted him to meet Brad. But she also knew that introducing a masked man as her husband might only make things worse. Well, he's a busy man. But don't worry, I will introduce you both when the time is right, okay? Haley finally answered with a smile. Owen, who trusted his sister, was happy with her explanation. Once they had left the hospital, Alan hailed a taxi. He immediately put Owen inside and watched while Haley's line of sight was directed toward the black car across the street. Alan noticed this and sidled up to her. "I'll take Owen home first so you can go and speak with him," he said, nodding to the car opposite. Haley was surprised at his sudden offer, and hesitation flashed across her face when she looked at her brother. But she wanted to talk to Brad, so she agreed. After the taxi left, the black sedan drew up alongside her, and she climbed inside. "How is your brother?" asked Brad as they tailed the taxi that had taken Owen and Alan. "He's all right, thankfully. He just suffered minor injuries," she said with obvious relief. "That's good news," he said. "Yes, you're right," she agreed. Haley didn't know how to tell him that she wouldn't be going home that night. She wasn't sure that she wanted to stay away. She had missed him while he had been gone for several weeks, and now that he had finally come home, she wanted to spend time with him. On the other hand, she couldn't bear to leave her brother alone so soon after his accident. Haley's world had revolved around Owen ever since they were young. She had brought him up and been both mother and father to him, despite being so young herself. She had always dropped what she was doing in an instant if she thought her brother had needed her. Previously, she had always prioritized her little brother over everything else, even more than herself, without any hesitation, which was why she was surprised that she was hesitating now. At that moment, she realized one thing for sure. Her world was definitely changing. Episode 69. Torn. "Are you all right?" Brad's words broke the long silence, and Haley was finally snapped out of her thoughts. She realized that she had been sitting quietly for some time and hadn't noticed they were already close to Cold Spring. "I'm fine now. I'm just a worrier when it comes to Owen." She forced a smile as she looked at Brad, but as though the man could sense the despondency behind her smile, he patted her head softly. This made Haley genuinely smile, and as she felt his warm, gentle hand, her worries seemed to melt away. She then took a deep breath and stared intently at him. "To be honest, I really want to go home with you, but she began, then paused, and a solemn expression flashed across her face. Brad patted her head again. "It's fine. Stay with him. He needs you," he said. Haley was instantly relieved, but at the same time, hugely disappointed. She'd been looking forward to Brad returning and had even announced she wanted to have him to herself that night. But now, she would lose that opportunity. This made her feel inexplicably sad. At that moment, she convinced herself she would make up for it as soon as she returned, and if anything, she became even more determined. "Wait for me, Brad, and you had better prepare yourself because I definitely won't show any mercy this time," she thought with a smile. "Thank you," she said simply. "I promise I'll make it up to you when I come home," she added as she stared deeply into his eyes. Was all Brad said in reply. The car stopped in front of a huge building. Cold Spring was only a few minutes' drive from the city hospital, and they had arrived already. Haley opened the car door and was about to step out when she turned back to face Brad. "So, I'm going," she said. Brad just quietly nodded. She stepped out of the car, and the moment she shut the door, she bit her lip tightly. She had an overwhelming feeling that she didn't really want to leave him yet. She wanted to stay with him for just a little while longer. She gazed at the car's window, and before the vehicle could move, she walked around to the other side and impatiently knocked on the window near Brad. The window immediately wound down, and Brad curiously moved his head closer to see what she wanted. However, before he could even ask what she wanted to say, and without any warning, she moved her face closer to him and kissed him. It all happened so quickly, and she didn't give him a chance to react. Before he knew it, she ran away in a flash, leaving him frozen in an awkward position. It was another kiss and run maneuver. However, it was a little different this time. It was kiss and run version 2, the kiss on the lips. Episode 70. Home. Brad and Tyler were back at Gray Mansion. It was already past midnight when Tyler entered Brad's study. He was surprised when he saw Brad was still awake, especially since he was currently in this house. Brad had always been a night owl, but ever since Haley had started living there, Gray Mansion was the only place where he followed the normal rules of daylight. The house that used to just be a house had become a home for him. It became a place where he could sleep peacefully, as if he had found his warm, safe haven.
What are you doing? Can't you sleep?
Tyler asked as he sat across from Brad, but Brad remained silent, which only caused Tyler to sigh deeply as he leaned lazily back on the couch.
Brad, you do realize that you're changing, don't you?
He continued as he stared out of the huge glass window at the thin crescent moon.
In what way?
Brad looked up. His reply instantly made Tyler's spine straighten. His features turned even more villainous when he grinned mischievously and meaningfully.
You're finally becoming more human. She's turning you back into your human form. Rather unexpectedly and rather quickly, he answered.
Brad became silent again. His expression, still devoid of any emotion, remained blank. However, a faint light was glimmering in his extraordinary eyes. Tyler, who spent most days beside him and had been watching over him all this time, was among the few who knew how much of a monster Brad really was. He had never imagined that one day, someone could soften him like this. Watching him now made Tyler realize that Haley's existence in Brad's life was no longer just special. She was way more than that. She was literally the ray of hope that ignited a spark within Brad to feel again.
So it's true, he thought. Love is indeed something that shouldn't be underestimated after all.
Later that night, Brad remained wide awake as he lay alone on their bed. He stared at the white teddy bear on the bedside table and the books beside it. The room was quiet. The silence that never used to bother him before now seemed so loud that he couldn't sleep. At that moment, he realized that this house was just another cold place without her. The next morning, Brad woke up and was walking downstairs when he heard Tyler and Alan talking. They seemed to be discussing something, but they instantly clammed up the moment they saw Brad. The cold man's eyes narrowed immediately. As he walked toward them, Leo appeared in front of him, but the sight of him seemed to anger Brad.
Why are you here?
He asked Leo coldly. Brad could already tell that he had arrived without Haley.
Well, boss, Miss Haley told me to come,
he answered with both hands behind his back, like he was hiding something. The cold man's growing rage seemed to vanish instantly the moment he heard her name, and that Leo was here under her orders.
Why?
He asked.
She asked me to give you this,
said Leo, and Brad was rendered speechless as he stared at what Leo held in his hands.